Hello and welcome to BricsCAD BIM training for version 20. My name is Julie and I will provide you with an introduction to the training course materials and an overview of the BricsCAD BIM interface. The training materials can be found in the download link in the description below and include a PDF of the training modules with step-by-step instructions and drawing files for each module. The drawing files include starter files and intermediate files. The starter files are what you'll use to go through the exercises, and please be aware that some of the exercises build on your work in these files. But don't worry, if you get stuck or can't finish the section, you can use the intermediate files to put you back on track with the lesson. If you've not done so already, please unzip the files before starting the training. A couple of things to note is that in the modules, any text that is highlighted in blue and bold indicates a BricsCAD BIM command, and any text that is highlighted in black and bold indicates what to type or click. Also be aware that all of the exercises are in metric units, millimeters. Also on this page are some configuration settings. We'll come back to these a bit later after we've had a look at the BricsCAD BIM interface. So let's get started by launching BricsCAD BIM. When you launch, you'll come to the BricsCAD launcher. This is where you can choose the workspace you want to use, and this is based on your licensing. So you have drafting, modeling, mechanical, and BIM. This is also where you can manage your licenses. And I also do want to point out BricsCAD Shape. Shape is a conceptual modeling tool from Bricsys, and it creates solid models stored in the industry standard DWG file format, just like BricsCAD BIM, and it's included at no additional cost. So I do encourage you to take a look at Shape. Now today we're going through BIM training, so we'll select the BIM profile. This brings us to the Getting Started page. And over here on the left-hand side, you have three options. The Home tab, this is where you create new drawings based on templates. You can open drawings, and you can also see a list of some of your more recently used files as well as the path of where they're stored. The Learn tab, this is where you can access tutorials and some sample files. And the Applications tab is where you can explore third-party applications. So let's go ahead and start a new file, and I want to be sure and have the BIM millimeters template. If you don't see it, hit more, and this will give you a list of all of your templates in there. And if you've done any customization at your office, you can create your own templates and store them here as well. Once we've got that selected, just click New Drawing, and our new drawing appears. At the top left, you see the BricsCAD icon. That gives you access to the file menu. You may have noticed that we now have a dark interface. This is a new feature in version 20. By default, the dark interface is active. If you want to change that, you can do so very easily by just right-clicking here in the ribbon. Going to dark interface, you can see it's checked on. You would just uncheck that, and that will return that to the not dark interface. Workspaces. We know we came in with the BIM interface or workspace. You can see that down in the status line. Right-click that and you'll see the other workspaces that are available there. You can also right-click up here, go to Workspaces, and see those same options. The Access 3D toolbar is up here near the top. And that's always there by default, unless you have made some changes to your configuration. Basically, this is your Express tools, and this is where you'll find many of the tools you'll want to use when you're working with 3D modeling. You can access this toolbar and other toolbars as well by right-clicking, going to Toolbars and BricsCAD. Here's that Access 3D. We see it's turned on with the check mark. Here's a list of all of the other toolbars, and there is a second page, so be sure to hover over more to get access to that second page. And here's our ribbon. The ribbon has multiple tabs as well, and those different tabs are organizing functionality together within those groups. And below that, we have our drawing tabs. I just have the one drawing open. If you had multiple drawings open, you would see the tabs here and can just simply click on a tab to go to the next drawing. This is also where you can come back to the Start menu and open up additional files as well. Below our working space, we see model and layouts. These control whether you're working in model space or in layout space, or paper space as it's sometimes called. But here's our model tab. Basically in here, you're working with your two-dimensional or three-dimensional entities, and those are based either on the world coordinate system or the user coordinate system. Next to the model tab is the layout tab. As I mentioned, it is also referred to as paper space. And this is the work environment that provides the model space view at a given scale depending upon the size of the paper. So all of that comes into play as to how things will be displayed. Also, next to the model tab to the left is a small little icon that brings up the layout manager where you can manage those layouts. A set of dockable panels is shown on either side of the screen, on the left and the right. In the BIM workspace, by default, on the left-hand side, we have the structure browser, and we also have the BIM project browser. On the right-hand side, you'll find tips, the properties panel, components, details, BIM compositions, BIM profiles, layers, the mechanical browser, and BricsCAD 24/7. And if you don't want those to display, you can just click and they will disappear as well. Most of these are going to be covered in the training covered later in these sessions. Down towards the bottom, we have our command line. This is where you can type in commands and also where BricsCAD will show you prompts, options, and other information regarding the execution of those commands. Now, if you don't see your command line like I do, it's probably just because it's been hidden. So on your keyboard, hold down the Shift key and then press the F2, and that's a toggle. So it turns it on and turns it off. Also, when pressing just the F2 key, that will show you the full command prompt in a separate window. So this will give you all the history of what you've been typing. And finally, the status bar, we've talked a little bit about that already, but this sits along the bottom edge of the BricsCAD application window, and it does contain a lot of information about the settings in the current drawing. So now would be a good time, let's go back to talk about the settings that were listed at the beginning of your PDF file. So here along the status bar, we want to make sure that several things are turned on. So we have eSnap, S-Track, Dynamic UCS, Dynamic Input, the Quad menu, and the rollover tips. Now, mine were all on. If yours are not on, they might be dark. Just go ahead and click on them. eSnaps controls your entity snapping, and by just turning it on and off, you're turning all of them off at the same time. You can right-click to go in to define which snaps you want on, as well as additional settings. And that's pretty typical with all of these. You can go ahead and right-click to get into the settings. S-Track controls your entity snap tracking. The Dynamic UCS controls the dynamic UCS, whether that's on or off, and whether it's working with faces of 3D solids or on other entities. And the dynamic input dialog box controls that, whether that's on or off, so whether you see that or not. And then your rollover tips, that controls whether or not you see those rollover tips. Now there are a couple of other configurations that we're just going to type at the command line. The first one is DM extrude mode. And notice as I start to type that I'm presented with some options that might match what I'm typing. Once I've got those options, I can use my scroll keys on my keyboard and go ahead and select the item. and just hit enter. So for the DM extrude mode, we want that to be set to 3. So if it doesn't say 3, just type in 3 and hit enter. Now this setting controls how entities are extruded, and 3 is the default setting for BIM. And that basically determines whether a separate solid is created and or subtracted from the intersection solids. Next is the BIM OS mode, and that should be set to 1. And this setting controls snapping behavior with linear solids such as structural steel columns or pipes or HVAC ducts. The quad display should be set to 5. This setting controls how the quad menu displays, and 5 means it will display when the cursor hovers on an entity and also with a right mouse click. And then finally, this is optional. We have anti-alias screen. That should be set to 2. This setting controls the amount of anti-aliasing or edge smoothing that's applied during on-screen rendered mode displays. One other item is to type in selection modes, and we want that to be sent to 6. We're going to talk about this later in more detail, but basically that's referring to some things up here with the prioritization selection for edges, faces, and boundaries. And with 6, we want that edges to be off and the other 2 settings to be on. And I know they're on because there's a blue box around the boundary detection and the selection of faces. And one last item is in our structure browser, and that is we're going to click here on BIM and then options and make sure that your select entities when selected in tree is what's been selected, and hit OK. Our next topic is viewing. If you work with many entities in a drawing, everything that you have in the drawing is visible in the view. When you want to temporarily make only a few entities visible or a particular entity visible and manage them in a view, you can use the hide or isolate tools. To see how this works, we'll open one of the starter files. So go to your Start menu, open Drawing. Now you may need to navigate to where you unzip the files. We want the starter files, interface, viewing and navigation, and the building _ M1 DWG. Go ahead and double click that. The hide tool temporarily hides selected entities in the view. Now in this drawing, we want to hide the windows on the right side of the drawing. So go ahead and select the windows by left-clicking each of the rows, and you'll notice that our quad menu appears. Now mine shows isolate and hide entities on my quad menu. That's just because I've recently used that. If you're not seeing that, you want to move your cursor over to the Select tab, and now you'll see hide, isolate, as well as select similar. But right now what we're interested is hide. So just go ahead and left-click on that, and now those windows are hidden. The isolate tool temporarily hides all entities except those that have been selected. So again, on our model here, let's go ahead and select all the windows on the left-hand side of the building. And again, my quad menu comes up. We'll go to Select and choose the Isolate entities. Now we can see that those are the only entities that are visible. Now it is important to understand that the hide and isolate does not affect your layer states. This is just a temporary setting. Now, when we want to come back to our entire model, we want to use the show icon or the show entities command. And I'm going to show you where that is located here in the ribbon under the Home tab. It's in the View section there. We've got these 3 icons, isolate, hide, and show. So I'm going to go ahead and click Show. Those are also available through the Access 3D bar right up here. Now there's still another way that you can use Show, Hide, and Isolate, and that's with the Structure Browser. So over here on the left, if your Structure Browser is not visible, go ahead and click that. And the way that the Structure Browser works is it's a tree view. So here's our drawing or our model. And then we have building elements, entities, and sections. Each of those can be expanded. Under building elements, we see those different building types of building element types: roof, room, slab, stair, wall, and window. And beside each of the element types is a number. That number tells you how many types of each of those elements are in the model. So for walls, we can see that there are 54. And when I click on that, all 54 walls are selected. And I know they're selected because now we see the green grip points. Simply right-click to bring up the menu, and we have our options: show, hide, and isolate. Let's go ahead and hide the walls. And now we can see that those walls have been hidden. To bring that back, I can simply use either the show entities icon from one of the menus, or just come back again to the structure browser and hit show. So the structure browser is another way to very easily be able to select entities. Sometimes you can't find something in the drawing to be easily selectable or in the model, but with the structure browser, that allows you to go through that tree view and find and select those entities. Now, if your structure browser isn't behaving like mine, it's just that the settings might be different from mine. So again, as a reminder, go to BIM, then Options, and be sure that you have Select Entities when selected in Tree Visible, and hit OK. As you navigate around and through your 3D model, the location of the model in space remains constant. It's just your current view or your viewpoint of the model that's changing. So let's talk a little bit about how you can navigate. The most used navigation tools are zoom in and out, pan, and orbit. And these can all be easily accessed through the mouse and keyboard. To zoom in and out, you just use your middle button or your scroll button on your mouse, and that will very easily zoom. To pan, hold down the wheel of your mouse or the middle button, and that allows you to pan. And then if you'd like to orbit, you need to hold down the Shift key on your keyboard and the mouse button or wheel at the same time, and that allows you to orbit. Now there are some additional zoom, panning, and orbit tools in the ribbon. If we go to the View tab, we can see zoom extents, we can see panning, so those options are there as well. And then we also have the Look From tool, and you'll see that in the upper right of your window. You can see that in the middle there's a chair, and as I move my cursor around, it kind of shows you visually what direction you're looking at. So these little arrows here will allow you to very quickly move to a predetermined view. If I click on the north, south, east, west, that's going to give you more of an elevation view. And if I click right in the middle on top of the chair, that's going to be a top-down view. To view your model from underneath or from the bottom, just hold the Control key on your keyboard and then choose any of these settings. Next up are BIM sections. The Define Section tool allows you to create a cross-section in your BIM model and view the interior details. We can access the Define Section tool from the Modeling tab of the ribbon. Over here towards the far right, when you click on Define Section, notice your command line prompt. Select a point to place the section. Now there are a couple of ways we can do that. To create a planned section, just click a point anywhere outside of the model. Once you do that, you can move your cursor up and down to define where the cut line is, or type in a dimension in the dynamic dimension field to offset the section from the initial position. Another way is to hover over the face of a 3D solid that is parallel to the section plane you want to create. And again, it works the same way. Now, one thing about that is you do need to be sure that your dynamic UCS is on for faces of 3D solids, or it won't work. So be sure that that is turned on. And also, you can again hover over a face, but press your Shift key and that will lock in the highlighted plane, which will then allow you to start from a point outside of the selected 3D solid. So this is great for elevations. Pop back over to page 9 of your handout and you can have more information here on BIM section types and some diagrams of what's happening. So here you see your section plane and your view direction, and that's what you'll see on your cursor when you zoom in on it. And the section types depend on the section plane directions and its placement in the model. So here is the cut plane for 3, which is the plan which shows a horizontal section plane. Number 4 here, the section shows a vertical section that cuts through the model. And number 5 here, this elevation shows the exterior elevation view. If your properties panel is not open, go ahead and open that with, again, nothing selected. We see no selection because this is where you can view some extra settings. So if we look here to the right for perspective, once I click on that, we now have a drop down to turn perspective on or off. We've been working with perspective on. Sometimes it's beneficial to turn it off, and this is where you can do that. And also our visual style. Currently we're working with BIM. You can change that maybe to wireframe, but I'll change it back to BIM. Next, we'll talk about selecting entities and the quad cursor. So this will demonstrate how to work with the quad cursor and highlight and select 3D model entities. And to do that, let's go ahead and start another new drawing. Be sure your BIM millimeter template is active and click New Drawing. The quad is a floating toolbar that adjusts its content depending upon what you are or are not highlighting and what you may have selected in your current workspace. So here we have an empty drawing. Again, there's nothing to select. Go ahead and right-click anywhere within model space and the quad menu appears in its no selection state. Once I move the cursor over the Model tab, the tool group is expanded with more tool options. So we've got different tabs and different options below each of those tabs. Right now, let's go ahead and draw a simple 3D box. So find the box command, left-click, and draw a simple 3D box. It doesn't matter how big or where you draw that. Now when we hover the cursor over one of the faces, the quad displays as a single icon, which is the most recently used tool with this entity type. And if I click on that, we can see, in fact, it does say solid face now instead of no selection. If I want to launch the most recently used tool, I can just left click or move the cursor over an icon that I do want. So we'll just go ahead and use push pull, and now we can use the push pull icon. Selection modes allow you to control which sub-entities, meaning faces, edges, and boundaries, should highlight in selection preview and can be selected. Selection modes can be found in a couple of places, including the Access 3D toolbar up at the top. Here we can see prioritize selection of edges, prioritize selection of faces, and enable boundary selection. You could also type in selection modes at the command line. And also we can see in the ribbon toolbar, again in the modeling tab, that we've got those 3 icons, the very last 3 icons on the very far right. And what they do is the prioritize selection of edges controls whether 3D solid edges are highlighted by selection preview and can be selected. Prioritize selection of faces controls whether 3D solid faces are highlighted by selection preview and can be selected. And our enable boundary detection controls whether closed boundaries in the XY plane of the current coordinate system or on the face of 3D solids are detected. So earlier we made sure that our edges were off and our faces and boundaries were on. And again, we know that they're turned on because they have the blue box around them. So with that configuration, when we hover over the face of this box, the solid face is highlighted in orange. When the face is highlighted, go ahead and click it, and that is now selected. If I move my cursor away, the face stays highlighted, so I know it's been selected. Now, as I move my cursor around, we can see different edges, different faces. But I can't seem to select all of the faces I want because some of them are hidden. Well, to find those hidden faces, click on the Tab key, and that will allow me to find those hidden faces. Also, when I'm hovering, I can click the Control key, and now the entire solid displays in blue. I can now click that to select it, and I know it's selected because now I see the green grip points. So the Control key and the Tab key are going to allow you to cycle through different positions here. For the edges, even though we've got the edges selection turned off, if I hover over an edge and also hold down the Control key, now I can go ahead and select that individual edge. So now what about boundaries? Well, to talk about boundaries, let me just draw a line on one of these faces. Now when I hover, we can see the boundaries are selected. And the boundaries are identified with a blue outline and a green fill or a shading. Let's go ahead and draw a second box. And again, doesn't matter how big or where it's drawn, because we've just talked about highlighting versus selecting individual faces, edges, and boundaries, but you can use selection windows to select one or more entities at a time. And within BricsCAD and BricsCAD BIM, there are two types of selection windows. There's a blue selection window that's created when you draw from left to right, and a green selection window when you draw from right to left. The blue window selects the entities that are entirely within that window. So here, even though I selected the first box and part of the second box, only the first box is selected into my selection set. The green selection window is going to include entities that are entirely within that window, plus any entities that intersect one of the edges of that window. So both of my boxes have now been selected because they intersect. By default, the selection window only selects entire entities, meaning solids, lines, polylines, blocks, etc., but not the sub-entities like faces and edges. So again, there's a way around that. When I create my window selection, if I press the Control key while I'm creating that, I can now select faces. If I do that again, but press the Control key twice, now I'm able to select the edges. And you can see that there's a tiny little icon to the bottom right of my selection window that shows me faces or edges. It works the same way with the green window. So I can select the faces or the edges. So what if once you've made your selection set, now you want to remove something from that selection set? You can use the Shift key to help with that. So if I've got both of my boxes selected and I want to remove one, hold down the Shift key, and now that box is removed. This concludes the training for the first module, the interface, viewing, and navigation.